welcome to the first of our fellowship interviews. Our students have been working 3 years to create their graduation show that's coming up this summer in 2025 at Farfield Mill. And I'm here today to talk to Sue Turnbull about her work. And I'm really excited about this. I love her work. She's a tapestry weaver and a mark maker and a woman after my own heart. So her work really resonates with me, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy seeing and being walked through her work. So my first question to you, Sue, and welcome.
Thank you, Kate.
Is what is the inspiration behind your work?
Well, I've been very lucky and I have been to Iceland a couple of times over the past few years. And it's a place that really resonates with me. So over the past 3 to 4 years, my theme that I've been working to has been about Iceland. I adore the landscape. I love the geology, even though I don't know much about geology, but it's so striking and stark. It really made an impact on me on the first time I visited. And I love the history of Iceland. It's got such a lovely, rich history with its sagas and the stories of the Vikings and how they settled the island back in the 10,000s. So I just love it, absolutely love it. So while I've been there over my couple of trips there, I just take hundreds of photographs, literally hundreds and hundreds of photographs. And I've used these as my inspiration while I've been there. So one of the places that we visited was this little village on the coast, and it's up in the Western Isle fjords, and it's called Ísafjörður. I'll apologise now for my pronunciation of Icelandic names. The Icelandic people are very, very kind, and they do understand that English people find it very difficult to pronounce their language. But this is Ísafjörður, which is the most beautiful little village. And while I was walking around there, I came across a particular building, which I will show you on the map. It's this little thing here, and it's a shed. And this shed really spoke to me. And I took, again, hundreds of photographs just of this shed. So I'm going to turn the page now just to show you what it was like.
So when you have 100 photographs,
Yes.
how do you select the 10, 20 that you're going to work from?
I'll just put this here in place and just get that in the right position. That's an excellent question and is quite a difficult one to answer, because I'm sure the people in this lovely little village thought I was a completely mad tourist, because I went round this shed that you can see there, which is just on the edge of the fjord. And I'm not joking, I must have taken about 200 photographs of it in its entirety and in the detail of it. And I think it's probably true to say that it can be quite difficult to isolate particular areas, but I did that through some of my mark making, which you'll see in the next bit of the film that we're making. I'll just turn the page again because I want to show you some of the close-ups that I did of this shed.
So is it the close-ups that were more important to you than the whole building when you came to settle on working from it?
Yes, very, very definitely. And as I'll say later on, it's a thing that has taken me years to work out, absolutely years to work out, that there was this epiphany and this revelation that in fact what I do is I'm a mark maker, and I recognise patterns and marks rather than whole landscapes and whole realistic things. And Kate's known that about me for a while, but it's taken me about 13 years to have the epiphany that I'm actually a mark maker. And if I look back through all my photographs that I've taken probably over the last 25 years, they are all patterns and marks, which I found quite funny actually when Kate pointed this out to me. But in these slides here, you can see this lovely peely painting here, if I just show you there, and these just gorgeous rusty areas with the nails and the drips where the rust has dripped down in the rain. So this was my inspiration for my work over the next few years working on the fellowship.
And how important do you think the verticals and horizontals in this are, because you're a weaver, a tapestry weaver?
Absolutely, they're an absolute delight for a weaver. You couldn't ask for anything better with the verticals and the horizontals. So that's a really important part of the structure that I discovered while I was weaving my samples and exploring these themes.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I can understand why you were inspired by these photographs. I would have been inspired by, like you say, the texture, the colour, the rhythms and the marks. They're absolutely stunning.
They are wonderful. They are wonderful.
And you're going to read us something,
I
aren't you?
am, yes. While I was doing my research around the subject, I like the Viking sagas. They can be quite difficult to read, and they're quite difficult to our stories. They're sort of very factual and don't show much emotion, well, apart from fighting each other and lots of blood and gore. But they're really interesting, and the lovely interesting thing about the sagas are that although they can't be taken as actual historical fact, because many of them were written several centuries after the events happen, there is that link with Iceland, because a lot of them, the archaeologists can actually identify the places and the buildings where they were set back in the time. And as a consequence of that, I've really got interested in this, and I actually did a short course with Oxford University about the history of the Vikings, which was really enriching and really interesting to do. But I love this as a tiny little bit of a saga, and it's got a weaving relevant bit, which I thought was rather entertaining. So it actually comes from Nial's saga, and that's a 13th century Icelandic saga, which was actually set between the years of 960 and 1020. And part of it is set in Norway, some of it is Iceland, and the bit that I'm going to read to you is actually set in Caithness. So the story goes, on Good Friday, that event happened in Caithness, that a man whose name was Darus went out. He saw folk riding 12 together to a bower, and there they were, all lost to his sight. He went to that bower and looked in through a window slit that was in it, and saw that there were women inside, and they had set up a loom. Men's heads were the weights, but men's entrails were the warp and weft. A sword was the shuttle, and the reels were arrows. And I think, having read that, I think I'm just glad to say that we've got more modern equipment to be able to do our weaving on.
That's lovely. Thank you, Sue, so much. So, Sue, question number 2.
Okay.
How do you go about developing your techniques?
Okay, well, this to me is sort of in two areas, really. There's the technique that comes from designing something, and then the weaving technique. So my favourites and go-to for designing are collage with painted papers usually, and then also mark making. So you can see from the picture in front of me, these are just some little paintings that I did them on a large piece of paper and then cut them up, just with paint marks and lots of different medium, but also some of the more subtle marks I actually did with what I call my handmade tools, which I like to use.
Can we see some of those, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of you may have seen these before, because we did some filming last year, and they're up on YouTube, and I did a little show video of how I actually use these tools. So this one here, you can see they're all very well used. They've got lots of dark dried acrylic paint on them, but this is made from a fisherman's knot, and you get lovely sort of fluffy subtle marks. I've used feathers, bits of string, bits of plant. This is called a dauber for making big bold marks, and there's feathers which are a little bit worse for wear now, but again they're quite easy to replace, and you get really subtle, interesting marks that can be quite serendipitous, really. So that's how I do a lot of my mark making.
Can I expand on what you just said there, which is that you work on a very large piece of paper,
Yes.
and then you crop down. So you go in and you select small areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll get a piece of A1 or A2. I've already selected my palette. I'll make my marks really without thinking too much about it. Obviously, I'll just keep an eye on the photographs that I've used. These have got lots of verticals and horizontals, as you can see. And then when it's all dried, I will just look at it, and I'll go around with like a little window. You know, if you get a piece of card and cut a square out of it, or a rectangle. Or some people will have seen where you can use two L-shaped pieces of card, and you can change the size of the window, change the shape of it into a rectangle or a square, and just pick up little vignettes of areas that within themselves have their own composition, and that's how I will have selected these.
And that keeps that energy, doesn't it, that is within these pieces, because you've been able to work really, really big and then come in, and you're not trying to be constrained by a small piece of paper.
Absolutely, and you know the detail is there. So I mean, even looking at the sizes of these, unless you were weaving very, very large, some of these would actually be quite complicated to weave, but you could again go in even deeper and look for another detail, and just even pick out a couple of marks to weave.
Mm-hmm. So when you've cropped these,
yeah.
So for instance, this one here has got a lot of detail on it, little marks. Are they made on the big piece of paper and you've cropped them, or do you come in and work on them again once you've made a selection?
These have actually all been made on the original piece, but there's no reason why you couldn't come back in and work on something that you felt was a little bit lacking. I tend not to do that, because otherwise I fall into the trap of overworking things. But there will be cases when I've cut the square out or cut the rectangle out, and it just needs a little bit of a helping hand, and I might just add a few marks. But as a rule, I do it in the one take.
Lovely, lovely. And you just said, how do you weave them?
Exactly, that's a really good question. So I spend a lot of time looking at them. That's the first thing, and trying to think how I do it. I did have a period where I was experimenting with slits and joins, which provide or produce quite harsh, rigid lines, which have their own place, and I might go on to develop that. But I decided, having looked at all these lovely marks, particularly with the brushes, that I wanted to look at the softer marks. So I started sampling, how do I actually make these softer marks?
Oh, let's have a look at this. This is an early sample, isn't it?
It is.
This is a real trial and error sample.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really early sample. So you can see here that I've done, or I've started to explore weft bundling, and I found that it was the weft bundling that was the probably the main technique that gave me the best tool for mark making. So you can see here I've got this nice shape, and we've got some bundling going on here with the black and the paler colour, and it's, looking at it now, that's actually quite heavy, that's quite thick and a little bit stilted. It was a beginning of a learning curve, because my mark making now is much more subtle. So this is great as a learning curve. This one up here has worked slightly better. As you can see, as I've progressed up, I've been a bit more adventurous, and I've tried some thinner yarns in there, and I've got slightly more subtle marks. And even these little marks here that are just dotted around, there's ways of actually making these marks finer by using different weft bundling techniques and different thicknesses and thinnesses of yarn. the mark up here, this is the rusty nail head here, and despite my best intentions and knowing that I had to work hard on making that round at the top, that was a failure, but that's fine, because that's a learning point for me. It's quite difficult to get a circular-ish shape in such a small part of weaving, but it's all part of a learning curve, and it's quite interesting, because when I look back on this one now, to me it's quite clumsy. But that's only because I've moved on and my techniques have improved and developed, and I know that I can make more subtle marks.
Yeah, and that was what was important to you, and you've left behind some of these harder marks, which would actually work very well for the mark making vignettes that you showed us.
Exactly. I think those lovely horizontal and vertical rust marks would respond really well to slits and joins. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So
very different.
Very different. And, 3 years sounds like an awfully long time. But if you're working towards an exhibition of unique work, it's actually, you can't do everything. You have to throw some things out for now.
Exactly. I think that editing is really important, because there is a temptation to think, oh, I need to do this, I need to put this in, I want to put this in and stuff. But I think to produce a body of work, you have to be quite hard. Hard on yourself, I suppose, and say, okay, that's great, but I'm actually not going to use that now. I'll save that for the future and do that another time.
Yeah. And I mean, tapestry is so slow. Textiles is slow, but tapestry is very slow.
Very slow.
And we produce far more on paper than we could weave in a lifetime.
Absolutely.
So some of it does have to be parked.
Yes.
But you may revisit some of these, because they'd be absolutely beautiful to revisit and work if you choose to in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
So question 3 for you, Sue. What is most important about your work for you?
Okay, there's a couple of things here. And the first one is presentation. And I need to be really humble about this, because in my very humble opinion, I think I've seen many really, really beautiful tapestries, and they've been spoiled by their poor presentation. And I just think that's really, really sad. So I have to stress, I'm still learning about all this in the way I'm going to present these tapestries, but I'm developing a lovely relationship with one of our local picture framers, and we've had lots of talks about how we might present these tapestries, the biggest one being whether to glaze or not to glaze. And she's of the opinion they ought to be glazed, and I'm of the opinion that they ought not to be glazed, because I like to see the textures and the tapestry. So that's been really, really interesting. But for me, presentation's really important. I think the larger tapestries perhaps can be easier to do because of the way they can be hung. But it's the smaller tapestries, which of course I'm doing. I think there's lots of different ways of being able to present those, and I'm hoping that my presentation is going to stand up to people's opinions.
Because you really don't like to see the warp after you've woven a small tapestry. You like that warp to be hidden, don't you?
Yes, and there's different ways of doing that, but depending on which way you do it, that also brings other things to consider, such as it can cause a bulge at both ends of the selvage, and it can sag in the middle. So myself and my picture framer, we think we've solved that problem. Sometimes I think it's nice to see the warp if it's part of the overall composition and it's an important element to bring in. But yes, as a rule, I'm not keen on seeing the warp showing.
Yeah, and this is one of your completed tapestries that's about to go to the framers, isn't it?
It is, absolutely.
And I think it's really exciting for people to see how subtle your bundling became in order to be able to weave it, that we talked about in question 2, and the use of pale lilac as your white,
yes,
so that you softened the white, and the lovely use of yellow 1, that very pale yellow, to add that cream going across. So there's a lot of subtlety and consideration just in your colour choices as well as your bundling to bring this soft mark to tapestry life, as it were.
Yes, I think a clever choice of colours actually helps with that. And again, I mentioned before, it's choosing the right type of yarn in terms of whether you're going to use fine, bundle the fine, or bundle the medium, and whether you're going to mix that with other colours. Yes.
So what drives those choices?
Experience and experimenting and sampling. I think it's learning on the job, because I can start to sample and think, oh, I'm going to do X, Y and Z, and it doesn't work, and I don't stop the sampling. I just carry on and change it as I go along, and usually by the top of the sample I feel as though I've got somewhere.
Yeah, and how important is what you like and don't like within it?
I think I have to like it. I have to enjoy it. I think that comes back to my second thing that I feel is very, very important. If I'm not enjoying it, it's not working. So I have to be careful. I have problems with my eyes, so I can probably only manage about an hour weaving intensively. That's a time constraint parameter for me. So it's not too bad when I'm doing the smaller tapestries, even though they still take weeks. But if I was starting to do a large piece, I'd have to have a real careful think about how I would actually fit that in. While I'm weaving about an hour at a time, I listen to podcasts or I listen to an audio book, and as I'm really engaging and getting into the tapestry, I can actually almost switch off and lose myself in the zone, which is really, really nice. And I very carefully just choose podcasts or choose a chapter of a book that's probably only going to last about 40 minutes or 60 minutes. So I know I'm not going to continue any longer than I've planned. And then something I just thought about really recently, if you're not enjoying it, then it doesn't flow through to your fingers in the weaving. And if you're enjoying it, the weaving just sort of expresses itself better.
I think you're very, very right there. If that's a very right way of putting it, quite clumsy really. But I completely agree with you that enjoying what you're doing, if you're doing that, and it's when you make the choices of this is working, that's not working, and you're enjoying it, it does flow through the body, through the fingers, into the piece of work. I know from my own experience of weaving tapestries in short bursts of time that you are problem solving, you are working on an area and things, and quite often you get to a point where you're stopping, but you know how you would progress. Do you keep notes of where to come back to, or do you just start afresh the next day with where you are at?
If it's critical, I will make myself a little note, or I put the needles in at a strategic point, particularly if I've hit a problem. If I've hit a problem and it's coming towards the end of the hour, I know I need to step away, and I'll put a little needle in just to remind me that's where you're going to start the next time you come. And 99 times out of 100, it goes much better when I come back, when I'm fresh.
Oh, I agree with that wholeheartedly. Thank you, Sue.
Thanks.
Right, so question number 4, and what I want to say to the audience is that these questions were actually selected by all of you as a group, and you're all going to be answering the same questions. And question 4 is really, really important for you all because of the bonds and friendship you have and the desire to work collaboratively. And it's one of the reasons that the exhibition is called Intertwined, because you have seen those connections and identified them. So question number 4 is, what are the benefits of collaborative creativity?
Well, that's a very large question to answer. I think they can be summarised by saying you learn more, you've got input from other people who've got quite different ways of working, quite different ideas. which is always very, very useful. You can bounce ideas off each other, come to some sort of agreement. It's great fun. I think we're very lucky in our group. There's 5 of us, and when you're with the right people and you get to know your group and stuff, you become great friends. You learn to listen, you learn to be flexible. You need to stand your ground if you need to. If some people think, oh, we need to do X, Y, and Z, and you actually think, yeah, actually, no, that's not going to work. You do need to be able to stand your ground and stick up for what you feel. But as you get to know the group, that becomes easier. Some of you may remember, particularly if you're able to come up to Farfield to see the Whispers project. This here is part of that project when we worked together as a group, and we all took a object or a painting, produced a piece of art in response to that, and then we changed round, and these ideas and the way we developed our crafts and our art actually changed as the pieces went round. So my picture was Van Gogh's Crows in Fields, which is one of my favourite pieces, and the first one that you see, the picture there, is actually the first collage that I produced in response to that, and then that was ultimately passed on to somebody else. And there's quite a bit of detail in that. I was really happy with that collage while I was doing it. I really enjoyed doing it. I love sticking and gluing and things, and I was very happy with the result. And then over the course of the 3 days as we did it, working together in this collaborative way, and I saw how other people work, and I had time to assimilate my thoughts. Right at the end, although I didn't need to, I thought, oh, I'm going to do the Van Gogh again. And here is the result. And as you can see, the picture is far more simplified. I've edited out a lot of things, and it looks quite different. And I'm very happy with this piece as well. But I think one of the things I learned over those few days is to edit things out that didn't really matter or didn't matter at the time, to simplify things, and also observing how other people had worked in their style of their art language. And again, that only came through collaborative working.
Two very different collages, and 3 days apart. And it's very interesting that earlier on in our interview, one of the things you've talked about is that need to edit and not throw everything at it. And here you have captured an essence of Van Gogh, and it's beautiful. And if you were to do it again, I'm sure it would be a very different collage, but very beautiful, very weavable.
Yes, this is far more weavable, which is, I think, is the important thing, because it's been so simplified, and you can actually make the detail come out in the weaving rather than the artwork being the actual complicated bit.
Beautiful pieces. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
So the final question, Sue, is how has taking part in the Artie Bird Fellowship programme changed you personally? Because you have invested 3 years of your life in this. So what have you gained from it?
Well, I think the first and probably the most important thing for me is I've improved technically, so I'm more confident about my weaving, and that's all been down to all the practice weaving I've done and the proper weaving I've done, and then also working to deadlines for some things. Over the course of the couple of years, I've embraced other weavers, and I've done a couple of courses with people like Elizabeth Buckley and Sue Lawty. So I've just got a couple of pieces to show you. The one that you can see at the moment is one of the pieces that I produced as a result of Elizabeth's course about weaving water, and I learnt so much with her. You can just learn so many different things, different ways of thinking, different ways of designing, and different ways of weaving. So this here is a picture, again, it's actually from Iceland, and it's some posts sitting in some glacial water. So learning to weave water was really a very enriching experience. So I need to get this all sorted out and framed properly and presented nicely, but I thought you might like to see that.
I think it also shows the development of bundling.
Yes,
That's
it does.
so important with Elizabeth
Yes.
and the way that she works. And it's really interesting to see how much of that you took on into your mark making and
Yes.
made it your own. As
I
it
think
were.
that's a really good point. We did quite a bit of bundling, particularly for this. So yes, you're absolutely right.
It's a beautiful piece.
Thank you. So the other lady I did a course with, and this is very, very different, is a lady called Sue Lawty. And I've always admired Sue's walks. And again, this was before my epiphany, because after my epiphany, I realised why I liked her work, and it's because it's about mark making and patterns. So this was very interesting because I chose to wove with something other than wool. So this is made using recycled newspaper and linen, and then the one on the right hand side, the yellow bits, are raffia. And this just has a life of its own. So a very different way of weaving. Again, I've got slits in a lot of this work, which I very well will work in the future with. But again, you just learn so many different new things from taking on the experience of working with other tutors.
And you showed us that again in the videos from last year. You showed us weaving with the paper and how you had to change your weaving technique to fold it and to bend it and things like that. So if people are interested in looking at that, again, go to our YouTube channel and look at the films we made last year.
Absolutely, a completely different way of weaving. The paper handles differently, the warps handle differently, and it does not weave like wool. You have to learn a new way to weave.
Lovely, thank you. What else have you got for me?
Oh, the other thing that I've really gained from the course is I've definitely become more rounded. So I've always enjoyed seeing exhibitions and reading articles, but we did quite a bit of work on learning how to critique things, so critiquing artworks. And by that I don't mean being critical about them. I'm actually talking about understanding them more and critiquing how things have been presented or how things have been written, things that work, things that don't work, things that you like or things that you don't like. So critiquing artworks, exhibitions in particular, because I've always enjoyed exhibitions, but I find it a more enriching experience going to exhibitions now. I understand more of the work that goes on in the background, the preparation that people have to do, and I understand more about curating the exhibitions as well. So that's been really important to me, and that you know, it doesn't matter if it's like a local exhibition in a local library or a national exhibition, you know, across in Amsterdam or down at the Tate. There's always something to be learnt about in that respect. And then I think the other thing that I've gained, and this is the last one, is I've now got lots of ideas as to how I can move my work along. So when I finish this course, I've got a whole battery of things to be able to do and to lean upon and to explore. So basically, I'm not forever weaving an Icelandic shed.
And you could.
I could.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you so much.